Yuuji, a young boy with limited skills, was mistreated by his father when he was a child. He resided in the shadow of his talented sister's genius, which brought wealth to their family. After a tragedy at his home, Yuuji was left parentless and was trained by malicious individuals to become the most ruthless, elite soldier in the world. His voyage was one of the most frigid experiences ever observed by onlookers. His parents constantly ignored him due to not possessing the same skills as his sister Kazuki. From a young age, her drawings impressed her father, and her skills surpassed those of renowned artists, leading her to win many art contests and have her pieces sold for millions of dollars. Yuuji avoided his little sister as he grew up because he was teased whenever he was with her. Kazuki aimed to alleviate her brother's loneliness by becoming his sole playmate and helping him learn how to throw balls. Spending time together, his sister supported him through it all, urging him to pursue his dreams due to his exceptional potential. She was his sole source of happiness and motivation to emulate her. Even his poorly made drawings, she would cherish them to help build up his self-esteem. Their father kept deriding Yuuji's work so much that Yuuji ended up destroying it out of shame. One day, a peculiar man approached Yuuji in his house and offered him a chocolate from a unique box. Yuuji's father labeled him as shameful, while the enigmatic man smirked cunningly. Over time, Kazuki started concealing her talent and ultimately dropped out of her art studies in Paris. Instead of that, she preferred to read manga with her brother, advising him to make friends through this rather than being lonely forever. She hoped Yuuji wouldn't follow in their father's footsteps and advised him to begin building relationships with others. At the same time, her occasional paintings became the sole income of their family, but their treatment of Yuuji worsened. One night, Yuuji is left alone at home, and when Kazuki returns, she is stunned upon realizing he's eating bread soaked in water. So he remarks that he thought he would get punished for eating food from the fridge without permission hearing, which Kazuki angrily feels guilty for leaving him alone. The next day, Yuuji tells Kazuki he made a friend named Sachi Komine, but Kazuki unexpectedly orders him to not make any more female friends without her approval and promises to find an appropriate girl for him. Presently, JB interrupts Yuuji's story to ask about Kazuki's practical jokes, so Yuuji explains how she once kissed him when they bathed together, giving him his first kiss. She told him about incest, explaining that it's when a brother and sister love each other. Man, things are getting freaky in here. She asked if he thought her love for him was abnormal, to which he replied she was just right, making her happy. Kazuki later enrolls at Takizono Academy, joining the basketball club instead of the fine arts club. Despite fearing her, Yuuji depended on her, but sometime later, she passed away in the minibus disaster. Satoko is shocked by Kazuki's death, while Ryuji falls into depression and alcoholism. His wrath grew, and his mother began hiding him whenever his father came home. The only thing Yuuji would remember was hearing his father yelling at his mom as she just took it and said, "I'm sorry." He became the worst father imaginable, so Yuuji and his mother ran away to a new home where she finally treated him like a normal son. He would enjoy her hand cooking and felt like he was living in heaven, even if they were broke. As long as they were away from his father, they found happiness together like that, but their peace wouldn't last. A year later, Ryuji runs into them and starts sexually assaulting Satoko again, before Yuuji, in a fit of rage, kills him with a bottle. Bewildered, Satoko hurriedly tells Yuuji to run to the station, and he later finds out that Satoko has committed suicide. In the hospital, Yuuji wearily reads Satoko's blood-stained suicide note and starts crying. A man named Rei Kirihara, whom Yuuji had met earlier, releases him from the hospital. Rei, also known as Heath Oslo, takes Yuuji to his mansion and makes him dress like Kazuki. One stormy night, Yuuji killed a man who had slapped him, impressing Rei, who enrolls him in a terrorist training camp. In the camp, everyone except Heath hated Yuuji, who is trained to snipe and fight. But one day, during a graduation exam, he's forced to fight Marlon, a girl who had treated his wounds. He hesitates to kill her, reminding him of his mother's scream, and Marlon manages to defeat him. Heath is disappointed and imprisons Yuuji. Marlon later apologizes for hurting him, but she graduates and gets killed in action. 2 months later, Heath gives Yuuji another chance to graduate. Disguised as Kazuki, Yuuji goes to Canada to assassinate a target, and after killing a man in a hotel, he remembers JB, a member of an American intelligence agency. JB reviews the records of Yuuji's victims: Glenn McPherson, a judge; Harold Bowman, a bank CEO; Benoit Robert, a politician; and Paul Graham, a journalist, and doesn't understand Yuuji's true identity until one night when they infiltrate Heath's residence. Asako Kurosabe, a woman leading the infiltration, swiftly takes out Heath's guards, and they head inside to find Yuuji disguised as a girl. Asako takes him out, but Heath quickly escapes and vows to meet Yuuji again. After ending his story for now, he suggests to JB that they take a short break. Meanwhile, in the student dormitory, Makina cheers for Tuna Man, while Sachi falls in love with Shark Man. Michiru asks about Yuuji, and Makina teases her before Sachi shows them a report about Yuuji's past, which the girls read to understand him better. After reading half of Yuuji's dark past story, the girls feel sorry to hear that he had killed a man and had no parents to protect him. According to Sachi, he was a victim of that incident, and Amon remarks that she feels for leaving Yuuji's sister, Kazuki, to die in the minibus disaster. Michiru thinks Yuuji had been taken in by his master and had lived a relatively enjoyable life, but Yumiko corrects her, saying his life wasn't enjoyable at all. Even Makina wants to know how much longer he had suffered, so Yumiko decides that they should read until the end of his dark past story. Meanwhile, in JB's office, JB asks Yuuji to tell her the rest of his dark past, so he continued where he left off. In a flashback, JB gets annoyed by Asako's attitude when JB reminds her that she must take care of Yuuji. Asako tells Yuuji she's getting him out of the hospital, treating him harshly by smacking his head, despite JB's disagreeing. Asako then tells him that to him, she is a god, and after taking him to her cabin, she takes off Yuuji's shirt so he could take a bath. JB notices that his body is covered in wounds, bruises, and scars, while Asako sees that he hasn't anything, so she tells JB to buy some food for them, 2 beers for herself, and clothes for Yuuji. As they eat lunch, Yuuji doesn't touch any of his food and kills a fly on the table with his hand without looking. He's shocked upon seeing the dead fly and throws up. At night, Yuuji falls asleep, and the women realize he's sicker than they thought. Asako tells JB that while bathing Yuuji, she saw he had 2 gunshot wounds, was stabbed by a blade, and had many scars and bruises. Asako drinks another can of beer, and JB decides to join her. She says it would be easier if they had just killed him, but Asako disagrees, remarking that as his god, she must keep him alive. The next day, Asako tries to forcefully feed Yuuji some food she made, but he refuses and asks JB to save him. JB tells him Asako was treating him harshly out of concern for him, and noticed she had made a special rice porridge, and when Asako said she added deer organs to it, disgusting JB, who screams while flushing it away, realizing Asako was a lousy cook. She makes Yuuji some edible food and feeds him. Later, they go outside, and Yuuji meets a puppy, which Asako reveals belongs to him now. Yuuji names the puppy John, though it turned out to be a girl, and as he's playing catch with it, the women see him smiling and realize he's having a good time. JB was furious when Asako writes a resignation letter to retire. She reminds her that she's still a spy serving the foundation of the Seers, but Asako says she was doing it because she was scared of dying. But she also doubts her ability to be an extreme long-distance sharpshooter due to her worsening vision. Instead of retiring, she decides to get a part-time job teaching the next generation, or become an instructor at a hunting school in America. She says she'll take Yuuji with her wherever she. The next day, after JB leaves, Yuuji runs in the forest because Asako told him to, with John accompanying him. She starts training him to fight, slamming him down and kicking him in the stomach with her knee. She orders him to use his head, not just his strength, and when the conditions got tough, Yuuji calls John for help, and she bit Asako's leg. When autumn begins, Asako tells Yuuji his speed would make him popular in elementary school, his strength in middle school, and his brains in high school, so she wants him to read all the books. At night, she polishes her gun while smoking and tells Yuuji she worked for the Seers, a Japanese-American unified anti-terrorism organization, and her job was to defeat enemies by any means necessary. She decides to train him how to shoot, even though he had already done that in Heath Oslow's camp. And the next day, she orders him to shoot a can from far away with a sniping gun. He misses the first shot, but succeeds the second time, so she gives him a big black case as a prize with the combination code 9029. He finds M24 SWS inside, a special sniping gun. For all the lessons she taught him, Yuuji decides to call Asako Master. During winter, Asako shows him the 250 MITI registered NATO rounds JB sent so they could go hunting. They go camping, drink coffee, and she wants him to shoot a deer, but when it looked at him, Yuuji couldn't do it, and the deer ran away, seeing which Asako was slightly disappointed. Back at Asako's cabin, Yuuji sees a wild grizzly bear in the kitchen and rushes to get his sniping gun, but sees the bear kill John. He isn't able to shoot when he tries to, and the bear gets away with John, but Yuuji runs after it with his gun and a knife. He tries to shoot, but slips in the snow, so the bear comes after him, but Yuuji stabbed its left eye with a stick. He cleans his gun and finally killed the bear before seeing 2 baby cubs as he realizes the bear was their mother, feeding John to them. Horrified, he throws up and fires his gun. Asako hears the sound from the forest before Yuuji returns with John's collar and tells Asako he couldn't kill the bear, crying over his weakness. As the sun sets, he buries John's collar and makes a grave for her, admitting to Asako that he was sick of being a coward and deciding to become like her. She tells him that it's not an easy path and that he's still under the mental suggestion that Heath made him into a killing machine. Asako says she sees him as a wimp who couldn't even kill an insect and reminds him she took him in because she was paid to train him into a well-trained man. She tells him about a war where an officer said 1 man, 10 kills, meaning he must kill 10 enemies even if surrounded. In the current era, it was 1 man, 10 rescues, meaning he must give up his life to save 10 citizens. Since he was half a man, she allows him to rescue 5 citizens, and Yuuji vows to try hard to not get himself killed. While Yuuji prepares ramen, Asako reveals to JB that he's not a virgin, creeping her out. JB becomes annoyed, particularly when Asako suggests a weird way to revert her virginity. In the kitchen, Yuuji reminisces about a recent bath with Asako and tells her today is his birthday when she inquires about it, so she cheerily knocks him on the head for not mentioning it before. She asks what his birthday wish is, and when he jokingly requests a kind guardian, she bites his shoulder in frustration. However, she surprises him by offering herself as a gift, though his sarcastic reaction earns him another knock, but this leads to her taking his virginity. After Yuuji serves Asako the ramen he made and heads off to do laundry, Asako proposes that JB should sleep with him as a learning experience on how to treat women properly, much like she taught Yuuji. After getting JB drunk, Asako calls Yuuji and gives him a special mission to escort the drunk JB to her bed and have fun. Despite JB's attempts to stop him, Yuuji misunderstands what she means. In a flashback inside JB's office, she reveals to Yuuji that his future path began with his commitment to work, as well as Asako's declining health. Presently, Yuuji has grown into a young man. One day, Asako trembles while handling him a knife, and despite her protesting that she's fine, Yuuji insists she's having too much alcohol and convinces her to rest on the couch. However, when Asako's work phone rings and she refuses to answer out of stubbornness, Yuuji intervenes. Despite JB's recently being angry at Asako for ignoring a job regarding an illegal immigrant's arrest, JB tries calling Asako to thank her, but Asako ignores her on purpose, revealing that Yuuji took her place in the operation. Furious, JB tells her that what she's doing is like what Heath Oslo did. However, Yuuji defends his choice as a voluntary repayment to Asako. Asako initially resists JB, understanding that Yuuji has escaped a violent world, but Yuuji sides with JB when she faces Asako on his behalf. Asako then asks Yuuji if he wants a work license, which he accepts, but JB advises him to not do it, believing he doesn't owe anything. Asako suggests he consider his decision, and after mocking JB's meddling, Yuuji storms outside with her after she shoots the ceiling with her gun to silence Asako. JB then stops at a dam to provide Yuuji with a reason and purpose in life, but he declares he wants to become like Asako, though JB remembers Asako saying the world doesn't need 2 Asako Kurosabes. Despite her final warning, Yuuji is determined to repay them both by taking his first steps towards becoming a CRS special agent and following Asako's path. The next day, Asako assigns Yuuji to attend a naval training academy in America, specifically the United States Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California. They travel together, but when they arrive, she leaves fine to find a job as a hunting school instructor, so Yuuji boards a bus to the depot, where he interacts with another recruit, jokingly claiming he killed his parents. When they get off, a drill instructor orders Yuuji and the other recruits to run to the in-processing building. One recruit complains about receiving 8.5-inch boots instead of the requested 10-inch ones, but Yuuji advises him to buy replacements and introduces himself to Daniel Bourne, who mistakes him for Eugenie. Danny prefers to be called by his nickname and dubs Yuuji Shorty, not understanding Japanese names. As they settle in, Danny snores loudly during sleep. The first day of recruit training begins with the arrival of the strict instructor, Agnes Garrett, who singles out Yuuji by calling his ID number. Agnes acknowledges Yuuji as Asako's student and offers him special treatment, smacking him in front of everyone before leaving. During physical training, Danny struggles, but Yuuji encourages him to keep going. Later, during swim PT, Agnes challenges them to swim 1,000 meters, pushing Danny's limits. At lunch, Yuuji, wearing a band-aid from an earlier incident, criticizes Danny's mopping skills, unaware that Agnes is behind him. So Danny jokes about Agnes's habits and marriage prospects, not knowing she's behind them, after which they both get punished with incentive training. On the second day, after a shooting range session, the drill instructor questions Yuuji's shooting accuracy, but Agnes defends his skill, referencing a document confirming his connection to Asako, known as the Marine's top sniper. As they discuss Yuuji's future, a pink-haired woman notices them. Impressed with the recruit's performance, Agnes acknowledges their shooting skills, with Yuuji stashing his award in his locker. Later that night, the pink-haired girl, Millie Stanfield, approaches Yuuji, teasingly calling him Genie for his shooting skills, despite his reluctance. Millie challenges him to a hand-to-hand combat rematch, which he swiftly manages to win. As they talk, Yuuji discovers her full name, Melila Stanfield, but she says she prefers Millie Stan, and proposes a shooting challenge the next day, wagering her cleaning duties if Yuuji wins. Although Yuuji initially misses, he succeeds on his second attempt, impressing Millie with his shooting skills, but they're later scolded by Agnes for sneaking out as their recruit training ends. In the next term, Yuuji joins an infantry platoon before serving as a combat marksmanship coach. He's then assigned to a Marine Expeditionary Strike Group in the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit for his final exam. On board, Danny and Yuuji bond as privates, sharing stories about their purchases and encounters with Millie, who joins them as well. As they settle in, they notice an erotic man amusing the soldiers. Bro really decided to bring hentai to the army. Yuuji instructs another soldier in target practice before their deployment to a stormy battlefield. On the day of the funeral, one soldier died in an accident, and that soldier was Daniel Bourne. Yuuji and the others, as well as Danny's family, attended his funeral, and while Danny's daughter and Millie were crying over his death, Yuuji, in his thoughts, remarks that Danny's death was a joke. When Yuuji, Danny, and Millie were on the Navy ship during afternoon mess, Danny asks Yuuji if he had heard of Immortal Robbie, and mentions that he would be assigned to the same platoon as them. Then they all head into a room with a guy playing an erotic game again, and the guy ignores them until Millie kicks him in the head to get his attention. He finally introduces himself as Immortal Robbie, although his real name is Robert Walson. Millie says she thought Robbie was really immortal, but when they heard a girl in the erotic game saying Big Brother in Japanese, Yuuji realizes he meant Imuto, a Japanese word for little sister. Millie then gets irritated by Robbie, while Danny begins to get annoyed a little as well, questioning why the world is so cruel. Robbie calls Yuuji usually Cajun, but Yuuji doesn't like it when, like all the Americans, Robbie doesn't bother remembering his name. Yuuji also gets annoyed when Robbie asks him about the maids riding around on mommy bikes in Akiba. This guy's really trying to piss him off. Later, they arrive at an island and are ordered to rendezvous with the rest of their unit further inland. While moving to the rally point, Yuuji inwardly introduces his comrades and himself once more. Daniel Bourne, born in Arizona, a former car thief and tough kid from the block. Miliela Stanfield, an extremely poor prostitute who sold her body in bar bathrooms to pay for her meals every day. Robert Walson, an anime otaku who only loved two-dimensional girls, and himself. Yuuji Kazami, a cowardly sniper who couldn't bring himself to kill a man. He admits that together they are a group with a lot of issues. Suddenly they stop as they notice a huge bird on a tree. Danny is about to shoot the bird, but Yuuji stops him to kill it himself. However, after killing it, Yuuji throws up again. Later, the fire team discovers a cave and is warned by a Marine digging outside not to stop walking and to get through the cave quickly. As they pass through, they find the bodies of multiple Marines that haven't been retrieved. At their bivouac site, a Marine enters to meet Yuuji and introduces himself as Edward Walker, also known as Eddie. He explains that he was formerly coached by Yuuji and was now part of their unit. After that, they met Justin Mike Meyer, the second lieutenant and a platoon leader, but he wanted them to call him Jay. They were welcomed as part of the Marine Expeditionary Strike Group, 15th MU Special Operations Regiment, attached to Bravo Troop, nicknamed the Unwanted Child Platoon. Jay saw them as kids, but then he became a fool himself because in his side of the story, Jay rebelled against his parents and tried to become a dentist, but instead he became a commissioned officer. After he declares that he hates the downright lie that is his name, he cries a little, confusing the others. When Jay calls for Lance Corporal Allison to get him some coffee, Eddie reminds him that she was killed in action during an ambush a few days ago. Jay then asks Yuuji who is the third type of professional who should be praised for diligence and not being able to surrender after scientists and debt collectors. Yuuji says it should be soldiers, but Jay remarks that when things are hopeless, they must run away. He then tells them about bush dogs, explaining that they are animals capable of running backward at full speed to escape from a tight spot, and he compares the bush dogs with his soldiers in front of him. Later, Jay renames his group to the Bush Dog Platoon, and he orders them to shout their victory cry while holding their guns by shouting "Arfu" so they comply. During operations on the island, Bravo Troop is utilized in scouting and combat patrols, primarily placing landmines throughout the area of operations, sometimes getting into small battles with the local guerrilla fighters. Late one night during a rest stop, the guerrilla fighters attack the Bravo Troop after trying to lure the enemy into a counter ambush. The platoon gets bogged down by a platoon-sized element about 20 minutes away from reinforcements. Yuuji starts returning fire with everyone, but slowly becomes sick as he continues to kill. As the enemy slowly approaches them, Yuuji suggests the rest of the platoon camouflage him and fall back to the reinforcements. Danny disagrees, saying that as friends, they must never leave him behind. Jay then tells Yuuji to snipe 9 enemies and orders the others to close with the enemy until reinforcements arrive. Jay also tells Yuuji about his comrades. Danny is a sketchy man, yet he calls Yuuji his friend. Millie relies on Yuuji more than anyone else. Robbie wants to run away and finish playing his game, and Eddie respects Yuuji. They all fight the enemy with everything they have to protect him, and after Jay orders him to kill the enemies, Yuuji, despite getting weaker, manages to kill all 9 enemies, and then he passes out when he tries to get up. After the battle, Yuuji wakes up and hears Millie humming. He realizes he was asleep on Millie's lap, and she informs him that reinforcements arrived and the enemies had retreated, all thanks to him. Millie then tells him that when things get tough, he should just run, as they are the Bush Dog Platoon. The next day, the Bush Dog Platoon, in another battle with the enemies, and surprisingly, both Danny and Yuuji start laughing while killing the enemies. Back inside the tent, Yuuji keeps reminding Jay that Allison was already dead, so he brings him some coffee. Later, the MEU's deployment comes to an end, and Yuuji returns home, but before he goes back to his home country, he salutes Agnes and bids her farewell, promising to return soon. Meanwhile, Danny teases Millie when she sees Yuuji leaving, and then leaves her alone when she cries because she truly misses him. Yuuji finally goes back to Asako. Yuuji then tells her that he would give his life to her, but she says she doesn't need it. Later, Yuuji has his final training, where he rescues Chizuru in Vancouver and sees Danny smiling one last time in his thoughts. Asako is about to pick up her dropped chopstick when she suddenly starts feeling weaker than ever. The next day at headquarters, JB officially codenames Yuuji 9029, a title from Asako, and says he doesn't have any particular opinion about it. Later that night, Yuuji snipes enemies on a ship to allow his allies to break in. The next day, JB assigns Yuuji to guard duty in Colombia, and before leaving, Yuuji asks Asako to not drink much. In Colombia, Yuuji spends time with a little girl until he receives a phone call from JB, ordering him to return to Japan immediately because Asako has collapsed. Yuuji finds out that Asako had suffered from a capillary rupture caused by a high-caliber rifle shot, which worsened over the years despite getting treated, and the booster drugs she used had made her body fragile. When Yuuji arrives, JB tells him that the periods where Asako is awake are getting shorter. Yuuji goes inside to see Asako, who tells him she was dying, hearing which Yuuji slowly starts crying and desperately asks her to not die. She admits she had said proud things, but had no idea what she was doing. As a soldier, she knew soldiers die, but she was thankful Yuuji survived because of her. Yuuji, still crying, tells her that he trusts her and is trying to live for her. She tells him that he must live for his own sake, accomplish anything, and to stand back up if he fails, which is why she raised him to become a man. But Yuuji disagrees and says he only does it because she's always there for him. He asks what is left for him in a future without her, and she tells him that he has to find that for himself. She instructs him to never take the easy way out and explains that soldiers who are told they have tried their best and done enough are allowed to die, but those who are told they are not finished yet cannot die. Asako says she believes that she's been given permission to die, but Yuuji vehemently disagrees. Later, Yuuji has a drink as JB informs him that Asako will not be able to make it, and there isn't anything they can do for her. Yuuji goes back to Asako for the last time, and before she closes her eyes, she asks if she can sleep now, so Yuuji says yes and wishes she has sweet dreams. Asako never wakes up again and passes away. The next day, JB takes care of Asako's body, leaving Yuuji alone in the cabin. After cremating Asako's body, Yuuji regains some of his spirit. JB tells him that a 9mm bullet Asako never had extracted was mixed in with her remains. She remembers when she first met Asako in a Catholic school and they became friends. After the flashback, JB slowly starts crying, asking what part of that was a short friendship. Back in the cabin at night, Yuuji lies on the floor, asking himself where he would go if he died. Even though he didn't get his own permission to die, he remembers how Asako once told him he was not allowed to die until he saved 5 people. The next day, JB smacks his head to get him up, and since she could not watch him staying in Asako's cabin alone, she brings Yuuji to her condominium. While Yuuji eats a sandwich, JB stops coming home because she's busy with work. On the couch, Yuuji remembers Asako telling him about a trip that they should take to Hokkaido, but they never went on that trip together, and Yuuji feels that he's discovered what he should do. Later, he tells JB he was going on a trip but would be back, and begins his motorbike trip. Then he went on a ship, and then on the motorbike again, yelling Asako's name. Inside a diner, Yuuji messaged JB, stating that he loves her, so she asks if he's drunk, but after that, the motorbike runs out of gas and is towed away. Suddenly, a biker stops and asks Yuuji if he wants to hitchhike, but Yuuji declines, thinking he's a huge idiot with no destination. Later that night, while walking along the road, he looks at the starry sky, reminding him of youth. He texts JB, telling her that he's coming back home, and later visits Asako's grave. He pours a can of beer on her gravestone. He tells her he came back without figuring anything out and that he broke her bike, so JB had to fix it. A spirit image of Asako asks if it was fun, and he agrees it was, hearing her voice. He informs her he's going to start his youth over by going to an ordinary school. In the present, Yuuji tells JB that he asked for her help to enter the reserves at Sears, requested Chizuru's help, and is allowed to enroll at Maihama Academy. Suddenly, Kiara enters and tells JB she had finished checking over Yuji's S-period personal record and wants JB's approval. Kiara notices Yuuji, and when he tells her he was not in a good mood, she asks if he could touch her butt, but he refused to do so unless they were alone. Bro doesn't want to get freaky in broad daylight. JB spanks Kiara and orders her back to work, but before that, Kiara says she to talk to her about an info leak from Division 1 just between them as Yuuji leaves. Back at the dormitory, after reading Yuji's entire story, the girls are worried about him, but Yumiko gets over it quickly and told the others that the same as always would be fine. Meanwhile, Yuuji receives a phone call from a man from Information Division 1 and assigns Yuuji a mission under Spec 9 to snipe a terrorist leader known as Ethan Glow. Yuuji gets his sniping gun ready to fire. However, just as he's about to shoot, Yuuji sees a familiar face, triggering his trauma. He realized the man isn't really Ethan Glow, but Heath Oslo. Yuuji read Heath's lips from afar and sees him telling Yuuji he's returned. After that, the mission fails and the man called his boss, asking what to do with Yuuji, alias 9029. The person on the other end orders him to restrain and retrieve Yuuji and have him step down from the stage. Back at the dorm again, Yumiko tells the others to change the channel, and when Makina does, they see news stating that Heath Oslo led the terrorist organization and attacked the embassy, and the man who participated in the attack was Yuuji Kazami, shocking them all.